about football wise. But yeah, first and foremost, the thing most pertinent on our minds right now is that Georgia is the back-to-back college football national champions. It's back-to-back in college football. It actually doesn't happen as often as one would think. It's about every 10 years. So Georgia just did it. Alabama did it in 2011, 2012. USC 2003, 2004. Nebraska in 94 and 95. So it's about once a decade a team does it. And so, I thought Georgia would win pretty convincingly, but I thought TCU would hang in there for a half. I thought maybe Georgia would be up 10 to 14 points at halftime and then would take over the game in the third quarter. I thought TCU would hang in there a little bit, but that thing got out of hand really fast.
Once it got to 24-7, the way they were scoring, I was kind of like, yeah, this is over. And then it just kept going, and then they dug in through the interception toward the end of the first half, and they got another touchdown. I'm like, what was the score at the end of the first half?
38-7.
Was it 38-7?
Yep.
Yeah. So at that point, I was like, yeah, this is pretty much over. And it just, it had the look of a lot of national championship games where the SEC is playing someone not from the SEC, and they just kind of crushed them. Although they put up 65 points, so that was kind of. I was listening to who was I listening? I don't remember. Was it on? Maybe it was Colin Cowherd or Joel Klatt. Maybe because Colin Cowherd had Joel Klatt on, and I think they were saying something like, it was Colin Cowherd saying Kirby Smart was kind of sent because Nick Saban was at the game because he was working with ESPN. So, like saying that Kirby Smart was sending a message like, yeah, we're in charge of college football now, not Alabama. Which maybe, I don't know. Because they really just kept their foot on the gas. But, it is one of those things where, like let's not downplay it. Like, yeah, winning back-to-back in college football doesn't happen that much. So, you're kind of an immortal team right now. Like, there's a handful of teams that have done it in recent memory. So you're one of those teams. So you're right up there with Alabama. Now we'll see, I guess, can they keep – because Clemson has won 2 national championships, but – they've kind of fallen off a little bit. So now I guess it's a question, can Georgia continue? I'm not saying they have to win the national championship every year, but can they continue to make the playoff and be in the conversation pretty much every year, and can they win a few more? We'll see. They seem to be recruiting pretty well, but now they don't have Stetson Bennett anymore, so.
Yeah, they've stacked top 10 recruiting classes over and over and over again, and that's how you get to the point where you have the players to be able to dominate like this. And I think, yeah, right now Georgia's got if you look at it like it's a championship belt, Georgia's got the belt. They've got they got the hammer, and until somebody knocks them off, we'll see how it goes. I'm not ready to jump in and say Alabama's done, but I will say that Georgia has been out recruiting them, and they have more depth than Alabama does right now. And so,
well, I think it's a matter of Alabama. Nick Saban raised the bar, right? And Clemson was able to get there. They were able to rise up to that level, and then they were able to beat Alabama twice. Now they've kind of fallen off a little bit, but Bama raised the bar so much, and then Georgia has, Kirby Smart's been able to build up, and now he's gotten up to that level. Now he's above Alabama. So, that's what happens. You raise the bar, and then other people try to jump up, around you. There's the thing I will say, though, is I think it's going to be more challenging after next year because there's going to be a 12-team playoff. And, if USC gets a defense, then they're going to be really good, and I'm trying to think of other teams. But, LSU could be, next year they could potentially be trying to win the national championship. So it's not like there's not going to be competition. And maybe Clemson can kind of come back a little bit. I don't know. So
yeah,
it may be a little tougher than it was for Bama.
Yeah, I do think it's highly competitive. I do think there's a lot of, there are more teams at the top now than there used to be. I think, from just my, overall takes from the playoff, like when I watched the 2 playoff games, Ohio State and Georgia looked different than TCU and
Yeah.
Michigan did. You could see the talent, and honestly, like one of my big takeaways, especially in the second half when the game was out of hand, was God, Ohio State's got to be kicking themselves. I mean, Ohio State
Yeah, because
would
they could
be
have won the national championship.
right if they would be the champions had a kicker made a field goal, or had Marvin Harrison not gotten injured, or a few things go differently, and it's Ohio State's trophy, and so it just kind of blows my mind. So it takes me back to, well, Michigan beat Ohio State 2 years in a row. Everyone went, well, Michigan kicked their ass. What's Ohio State going to do? Blah blah blah. And they came out and played their best game against Georgia. So I think that I think Georgia and Alabama talent wise are still at the top, but I think Ohio State is right there, right behind them. And so
and as for Michigan, I mean,
players.
Harbaugh could leave. So Harbaugh could leave. He could go to Denver. He could go somewhere else in the NFL. So I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. So yeah, Ohio State definitely. I mean, God, they came within, and that's the thing though. When you repeat, like, stuff happens like that, where you're able to get Georgia was able to get past that, and then they finished off TCU. So.
Yeah, so I'm not ready to sit here and, I mean, yes, they won back to back, but I'm not sitting here ready to go Georgia's just superior to everybody, because Ohio State had them beat. I mean, it's not as if a talented team doesn't come along and give you a hard time. And
we'll put it this way: Georgia's one of those handful of teams that we're always going to be thinking can win the national championship, or can be close to it, right? Like, you got Georgia, Ohio State. I guess you still put Alabama there. I'm not ready to totally, throw that over. Maybe you put LSU there, and then I'm trying to think of who else. I mean, maybe USC jumps in there. I don't know. We'll see. They've got a good start going, so we'll see.
yeah, so I mean, going over to the other side, the TCU side. I mean, look, incredible run by TCU. I started to feel in that game like, okay, maybe this is like the NCAA tournament where this team gets hot, they go on a run, and then they eventually play a team that just has a severe talent disparity, and they end up getting beat. And so, I give TCU credit. I don't like anybody giving me the argument that because of the way that game went, that TCU didn't deserve to be in the playoff. Like, look, this is the system that we have. They earned their way in. I mean, I'm not thrilled with the saying a team's, who's deserving. I don't really like talking about it that way. Do I think TCU would have beaten Alabama? No. But that's not the point. That's not the system that we have. And so I heard Colin Cowherd talking about, well, it's great to have a Cinderella story, but, we're probably not going to I can't remember exactly how he was describing it, but I look at it like, look, TCU's not in a 12-team playoff. I don't know that TCU's ever going to make the national championship game again, because it's too hard to win. It's too hard to win multiple games like that. If you manage to get into the top four and you have a bye, it's just going to be hard to win 2 games with teams that have that kind of quality of talent. And look, Michigan easily could have beaten TCU in that game. Michigan made huge mistakes that basically cost them the game. That game was a coin flip. And, so I think that,
yeah, I will say this for TCU, like, I mean, for them, winning the national championship isn't really, like, if they win the Big 12, okay, that's a really good year for them. I mean, they had a really great year this year. They didn't win the Big 12. They lost in the championship game. But for them, I mean, it's to me, it's kind of who really cares. And also, they could be trying to win the Big 12 every year. I mean, if Sonny Dykes is a good recruiter and they can keep getting people like Max Duggan is probably going to get drafted. They have that NFL receiver. So if he can keep getting a few guys like that on the team, then they could, I mean, because Oklahoma and Texas, I mean, first of all, Oklahoma and Texas aren't going to be there in a couple of years, right? Assuming the Big 12 is still around after that. I don't know what else could happen, but I mean, and even now they're not. Oklahoma, they lost a lot when they lost when Lincoln Riley left, and Texas. We've been talking about Texas for years. Like, is Texas back? I don't know. They're fine. They could be winning the Big 12 and getting into even a 12-team playoff. They're not going to get to the final game, but so what? That for them, that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a team that was 200-1 to win the championship. They were picked to be 7th in the Big 12 this year, and look what they pulled off. And by the way, we said that can't happen in college football, right? Like before this season, you thought there's no way that a team can't do that, and they did. And I don't like the other thing I want to bring up is I don't like people comparing this TCU team to last year's Cincinnati team. TCU is a major conference team with, Power 5 recruits, Power 5 players. I don't want to hear it. TCU would beat the doors off Cincinnati. That Cincinnati team isn't anywhere close to what this TCU team is. So I don't like, yes, they're a Cinderella, but this is a major conference team who beat some real competition this year, to make it to the playoff, so they didn't win the whole thing. So what,
Yeah. And yeah, I'm not a fan of TCU or anything, but I mean, this year was pretty crazy for them. I mean, they kept, like we were talking about throughout the season, like they're going to lose because they keep getting behind to these teams, but they kept winning games. I mean, like that Baylor game was nuts. Like they got the ball down the field toward the end, and then the last play, the clock's winding down. They have to run out there, line up, and kick a field goal to win the game. I mean, so it was a pretty great. I think that was a fun part of this year. To see them keep hanging around and keep winning these games. So
yeah, and look, you got everything you wanted. You got the major teams in the playoff. You got TCU in there. You got really good playoff games. Obviously not the championship game, but the semifinal games were fantastic. As a college football fan, I really think this is all you can ask for. And hopefully we get more of it with more teams in the playoff. But I wanted to, you talked about Jim Harbaugh, and listen, my thoughts, I think Jim Harbaugh eventually goes to the NFL. He's already said he's going to come back to Michigan for this next season, so I understand that. But I think at some point Harbaugh's got the itch. He wants to win a Super Bowl, and I think he's going to get a job somewhere. It's just a matter of when. And I think, and that's not a knock on Michigan or anything about them. I think what he's done with Michigan is about as well as you can possibly do. And so I think he's definitely going to go back eventually, but I hope he at least stays this year because McCarthy's got one more year before, if he wants to go to the NFL. And I think Michigan's got a really good shot next year. So I hope that happens. But I think he's definitely going to the NFL at some point. And looking forward to next year. Looking forward to next year in college football. I think, obviously, listen, Georgia's going to be at the top of the list, but the interesting thing is a lot of these teams have to replace their quarterbacks. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, LSU's quarterback is coming back, right? Florida's losing their quarterback. Like, all of these teams are losing their quarterback. So Michigan and LSU are keeping theirs. So that's interesting. It'd be interesting to see, if they get a leg up because of that. Because you saw what McCarthy can do. And I think Michigan, to me, the challenge for Michigan is unleash McCarthy more. Because I feel like he is their ticket. Do you want to beat one of these teams? It's going to be on him. And I think they got to involve him more in the running game. Let him throw the ball down the field a little bit more. Yeah, he made some mistakes in the TCU game, but I think he's got to do that, in order to get better, because that's the difference between when you get to the top. That's the difference is how does your quarterback play, and that's the reason Ohio State almost beat Georgia was because their quarterback played fantastic. And that's what it takes. We've seen something from Georgia the last 2 years. Unless you have Bryce Young, you're not beating them. Unless you have unbelievable quarterback play, it's not happening. So, but I'm really interested next year.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see how LSU does. I think, if Brian Kelly brings in another recruiting class, their talent level is pretty close to Georgia and Alabama. So I think they really have a chance to do some damage in the SEC. I also think Notre Dame could be a pretty good team. They got the quarterback from Wake Forest to transfer there, and that guy was the all-time leader in touchdown passes in the ACC. So I think Sam Hartman gives Notre Dame a shot to get into the playoff with their schedule. Notre Dame does play Ohio State next year, so that should be a interesting game. But yeah, all in all, great season. Really looking forward to it. It should be. I think there's going to be a bunch of teams in the mix next year, and we got one more year of the 4-team playoff, and then we're on to bigger and better things. So,
yeah. I think the. I mean, overall, I think the 12-team playoff will be great because I just think we'll get more good games. And the college football end of the season just feels like it kind of wraps up quick. Whereas like the NFL, for instance, you get the postseason, it lasts for a month or even longer, actually. So yeah, it's kind of, I think it'll be great, and we'll get these different games where it's like this team from here and this team from here are playing. It's like, whoa, we've never seen that before, or we rarely see that. So I think that'll be really good. Get more good games.
Yeah. We should have first round games before Christmas. So we usually don't have major college football games, before Christmas Day. So that'll be really cool, really fun to see. All right. So wrapping up college football.